And now to introduce our guest for today, I'm going to hand over to my friend, Executive Director at Lumino, Denise Gardner. Denise, do we have something special today for our audience?
We do. I'm so excited. I can barely contain myself. I just want to welcome everybody to our maiden voyage of Lumino. Today is November 23rd, 2020, and it's a special day today.
It is.
Because today marks the official launch of Lumino Presents. On this momentous occasion, we have an extraordinary guest with us, NASA astronaut Colonel Terry Virts. Terry is a U.S. Air Force test fighter pilot with NASA. He's a NASA veteran of 2 space flights. He's also the author of View from Above, about which he has very graciously agreed to talk with us today. And he's here to answer your questions about, his directorial debut, the film One More Orbit. That's exciting, right? And so with that, I'm going to pass it off and introduce you to Lumino's Director of Photography, Bill Carlson.
Well, welcome to Lumino. We're really enjoying ourselves putting this all together, and Colonel Virts has been nothing but a gentleman in this whole process and has provided us with some spectacular images that he's going to talk about. And so with that, I'd like to get to Colonel Virts. And Terry, thank you so much for being here today. And as soon as Rodrigo wants to, I think we could go to our first image and talk a little bit about it. We can talk about, well, it's on the screen. And obviously that's you with an icon in the cupola. And what struck me about it was also a little bit later in the book from where the photo is, you describe how you fell in love with photography. You started taking pictures, you'd obviously taken pictures, and been a photographer before, but all of a sudden it swept over you and this became a real adventure in terms of photography. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Sure. Yeah. Well, thanks for having me on. It's exciting to be here with Lumino and talking about today being a big day for you guys. Today's actually my launch anniversary. My last launch was a few years ago, about an hour ago. So I was just gotten into space, which is a cool part of today. But yeah, that picture you were showing was me in the cupola. The cupola was this 7-windowed module that I was in, that I installed on my first space flight, my first Space Shuttle Endeavour STS-130 mission. I put the cupola on the station, and then I went back about 5 years later and took a lot of pictures. I think they told me I took the most pictures ever. And so not only was I taking pictures for the book View from Above that you were talking about, but also I think that camera actually, Bill, that was, I think my Canon, which was the one that we used for the IMAX film, A Beautiful Planet. So I helped to make A Beautiful Planet with Toni Myers, who was my director. She was kind of my mentor. She was awesome. Unfortunately, she passed away last year, but she, the movie I just directed, I dedicated to her. So it was really awesome to work with Toni and kind of learn the ropes about making a movie, especially in space.
Absolutely.
Yes. Yeah.
It's so easy, right?
We have a saying, everything is harder in space, which is everything except for pull-ups is harder in space, which is pretty much true. It was an interesting thing. My DP was James Nyhouse, who's a pretty famous, ASC member. And he's done all the Space IMAX movies. And Toni was my director, who's also directed all the Space IMAX movies. So I learned from the best, but it was there's a lot of things going. The biggest thing is that we shoot it without them there to supervise. James was the DP for a film that he basically didn't shoot anything. He had one shot of the sun that he took himself. Everything else was me or my other astronaut colleagues shooting it from afar, which is a fun way to make a movie.
Sure, absolutely. I think we could bring up Rodrigo. Do you have some questions? And please just jump in. The next image is something, this is from when you installed the cupola. And Nicholas,
Exactly.
I believe, is the astronaut.
So Terry, is that you, or is that your picture
No,
of
no,
a,
no.
of a colleague?
Yeah, that's a picture of Nick Patrick,
Right.
who was this is on STS 130. So he's hanging off of the cupola, which was the module that I installed with the robotic arm, and he's waving there. This is actually one of the most iconic photos, I think, of the shuttle program. You see it a lot. It's on a lot of just, space shuttle projects and stuff. But I love it. It's just, this person hanging on a space station with the Earth in the background. It's an awesome, awesome picture.
It is. I'm kind of
Yeah.
curious about, and maybe it's a sort of an overarching question for you. As you approached your first mission into space, what kind of photographic training did you have, or are you mainly self-taught, or is it a combination of both?
So that's a good question. So I'm just a camera guy. When I was a kid, my parents got me a camera, and so I had to learn about aperture and shutter speed and focal length. And it was a Konica SLR. So you put the film in and you'd have to wind it, to go to the next page. So I was kind of self-taught, and my whole life growing up, I always had a camera around my neck. I'm the dad that the kids say, Dad, stop taking pictures. So that's just who I am. And some astronauts are like that. Most of us are not, but there's a number of us who are. Probably the astronaut mentor who taught me the most is a guy named Don Pettit, who's the smartest person that, if you know anybody who's smart, Don is smarter than them. He's that kind of guy. And he taught me a lot about the ins and outs of space photography. But there is a group at the Johnson Space Center. It's called the Photo TV Group. And they teach us about still photography, video stuff. When I first showed up at NASA, we still had the Hasselblads. So I learned, with the square format, that was awesome. They used to lend it to us so I could bring home this giant Hasselblad camera that was entirely impractical, but it was really cool to have a Hasselblad. So I got to learn with that. And so they teach you kind of the mechanics of photography, but the artistic side, or the eye for, hey, this would be a cool shot, or let me try a different exposure or whatever, is kind of something that, some people want to do that. And some people are more interested in going and doing their experiments, and they're not so interested in the photography part.
Well, that's an interesting point. I think I read somewhere that for the Mercury program, Hasselblads were designed to pretty much like wind up and go. I mean, there was, it was designed so that it would be a kind of a DIY thing, that the astronauts wouldn't be overburdened with, having to measure f-stop.
Right. Yeah, there's no time for that. But a camera like Hasselblad, there is still some manual requirements. And NASA flew those, I think, until the 2000s, because I showed up in 2000 and they still had them for training. It was getting phased out. And James, my DP for A Beautiful Planet, we had Canon. It was the first IMAX film shot on all digital, which opened up some really cool possibilities. If you watch A Beautiful Planet, there's some really nice night shots. There's aurora shots. There's some shots of the galaxy. There's city lights at night. All those things you can't do with film because it's 100 ISO film. It's not 10,000 ISO film. We also used a GoPro camera. Actually, it was a Russian GoPro camera they let me borrow on my spacewalks. And so Tony put together a really nice spacewalking montage just with a little GoPro. The Russians built a box to keep the temperature and pressure okay. So I shot some shots on that. So having those digital cameras in space made a huge difference as opposed to the wet film.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Now, the audience may not know this, and so I just want to point it out that in the IMAX film, A Beautiful Planet, your images were used quite a bit, and also not just your still work, but also some of your motion work. True?
Yeah. Yes, exactly. So what we did, James and I were actually having an ongoing discussion. I'd call him on Sunday morning, he'd be in the shower or something, and the phone would ring, and it was me on the space station. Hey, what ISO should I use for this night lightning shot? So that was, and I would do the same thing with Tony. Contact her remotely. What shots do you want me to get next? But there were several of us that helped shoot A Beautiful Planet. I was just one of them, but I think I was probably, they told me I had the most shots, and I was probably the most interested in doing it because I really loved it. I think it was probably the most important thing I did. So I kind of took it on as my project. But initially we were going to use the still camera and shoot it at 2 or 4 frames a second, and then convert that into video, just make a time-lapse video, and also a video camera. So we had the 1DC for the still camera, and we had a C500, Canon C500 for the video. And we ended up changing our plan for that. So we used the still camera for basically all Earth shots, and we used the video camera exclusively for interior shots. With the exception, there was one shot I did of a night lightning scene. It was clouds at night, and I wanted a higher frame rate because lightning is digital, it's on and off. And I wanted a high frame rate to show the lightning build up and then show it dissipate. So the one night lightning scene, I shot at 12 frames a second on the C500. But for the most part, we use still for Earth and video for inside the human shots.
I think what we'll do too is we can probably dig up a link for people to stream A Beautiful Planet. Just because I think there are probably a few people who haven't seen it yet.
The trailer, yeah, it's a great film. Tony, I think she saved her best for last. That's what I used to say. But the trailer's everywhere, and you can actually stream it online through Hulu. Disney, well, during the pandemic, they put a lot of IMAX films on Hulu as kind of a way to do it. And you can always buy it on Blu-ray or DVD, but it was available on Hulu recently. I'm not like part of that. There's no back end for me, but I love the movie. So
we'll make some calls.
Yeah.
We know some
people at Disney. Yeah.
I know.
All right,
Good.
guys. Let me bring in some questions from the audience, because people are already asking stuff here. And Terry, I'm gonna get you ready, because our audience is it's a hard one. It's a hard one. So get ready.
So I got to say, I'm making One More Orbit. We haven't talked. I got my One More Orbit shirt on. We haven't talked about that yet. And I love cinematographers. I spent a lot of time at the clubhouse out in Hollywood, the ASC clubhouse. I feel like they're my people. And I thought, maybe I'll be a cinematographer when I grow up. And then I had a chance to direct this film. And the first call I made was to James. Hey, James, will you be my DP? And we're getting ready to launch. We have our directors meeting. So it's me and James and we have 5 different shooting crew. Everybody gets on a phone call together. And I just give my direction, like, this is the vision, this is the story. Can you guys try and get this shot? And then James went into his DP talk. And I thought I was a camera nerd until I was on that phone call. And I had no idea what he was saying. And they all started arguing about all these terms that I didn't even know what they were talking about. So it was that moment I realized, a man's got to know his limitations. I realized that I'm not a cinematographer. I think I could be a director, but I'm never going to be a cinematographer. Yeah.
So let's bring that level of nerd to the string. So yeah. Curtis wants to know how much diffraction did the windows cause when taking pictures?
So that's a really good question, because that's a massive problem. In the cupola, unfortunately, we have these things called scratch panes. And so they're just basically plastic film that is attached on the inside of the window. And they're basically there to ruin your shot. So they make everything look kind of brownish, hazy, and there's terrible diffraction. It's like shooting through plastic, because that's what it is. In the US lab, we have this optically pure glass that's amazing. It's really good quality, but NASA has really strict rules about going down there. We had to wear a mask. Before the pandemic, we were wearing, surgical masks, and it was really limited to how often we could get in there. So you could either so what Tony did, and actually a fellow astronaut named Marsha Ivins came up with this idea. In the cupola, we took the scratch panes off, and we had a plastic we called a bump shield, to make sure you didn't bump into the window and scratch it. So when it was time to take a picture, you could just slide it open, stick the camera in, take your shot, and then slide it back. And it was a lot more convenient. So a lot of the Beautiful Planet shots were shot through the cupola, which is pretty high quality glass. There's not a lot of optical problems with it, because of that bump shield. However, there's a lot of debris out in space. There's dust, there's paint flecks from other rockets and stuff. So over the years, the outer glass pane. There's several glass panes. The outer glass pane has all these little pits and holes in it and stuff. The good news is when you focus on 200 miles away, that pit kind of disappears. You don't see it. But you have to get rid of that glass pane. For a view from above, a lot of those pictures were taken just through the or the scratch pane. And so there was some post-production required to kind of get rid of this brown mess. But so there are good windows and bad windows.
So I guess you touched on the next question by Pat Carney, your friend Pat Carney. He asked if you taped the lens to infinity.
I was just about to finish this, so I literally was thinking this thought. So you focus on 200 miles, not on infinity, and it depends on the focal length of the lens. If it's a 10 millimeter fisheye, you just put it on infinity. It doesn't matter. But if it's if you're zooming in at all, you have to go to infinity and then back off a little bit. It depends on the aperture and the focal length. And I did this one project. It was called Moon. And it was a science experiment. And I was photographing the moon. And they were going to use that. They could measure down to a third of a pixel how the moon size was changing. So as we were flying towards the moon or away from the moon, take a boom, 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 time-lapse exposure, you can measure your closure rate if you're getting closer or farther. And future sensors, so when we go back to the moon with different satellites, can use just optical imagery to navigate and you can figure out your closure rate. So anyway, in order to do that, I had to have exact focus, and I had to go to infinity, back it off a little bit until it was perfect. And then I had to tape. They wanted me to like Kapton tape the focus so it didn't move at all. So it was fixed on that thing. And at nighttime, one of the things that Tony taught me, one of the many things, is that if you're a little bit off of focus, just delete the file. It's completely worthless, especially on an IMAX screen. And so I do guest lecturing out at the USC Film School to teach in their IMAX class every year. And that's one of the lessons I always teach the kids. Like, if you're just a little bit off of focus, just delete the shot because it's worthless. So at nighttime, you would have to use the monitor and do the zoom in feature, on the camera. And just to make the star a point of light or a city light, a little dot, because even a small problem, especially at night, would ruin the shot and focus.
Sure.
All right. So before we continue with the questions, and I'm already throwing my questions away because the questions in the chat are so good. I'm throwing mine away. Let's see some more pictures. So this is one that Bill selected as well, and I think this is the construction, right? Like, this is during construction of the cupola.
It feeds into. I thought it would be interesting for people to see the outside as it's working with human. The heavy closures that protect it when it's not being used, and it's an amazing piece of engineering.
Yeah, it's an amazing little module. It's everybody's favorite module on the station. I think this is actually from my second space flight. So I think this is 4 or 5 years after I installed it. You can see all those smudges on the window where my head is, which tells me that this is this from SCS 130?
We can look it up and see, but I believe it is. Yeah.
Okay. It may be. It's taken from the Russian segment, has a module that is looking in this direction. But all those kind of parallelogram things are window covers. And so normally whoever the first guy up in the morning is, it's a mechanical rotating knob. You rotate it and that thing slowly opens up, and you peel them all back like an onion. And then normally we would just leave them open for the day, and then at nighttime we close them up. So every time you could pop your head in, look out, and go about your business. If there was a Soyuz coming or a cargo ship coming, because they vent exhaust and that the rocket fuel is nasty on windows, we would always cover them up. If somebody was doing a spacewalk and they were nearby there, we would cover it up because the space suit vents water. So if something was out there moving around, we'd close those window covers. But for the most part, we left them open and looked out as much as we could.
Let's take a look at some of the, this is a great shot.
This is a really interesting shot because you drew a parallel between scuba divers and astronauts. And we talked about the fact that there's a potential to get the bends. Actually.
Absolutely.
in a spacewalk, and I wonder if you could describe that.
So anybody who's a scuba diver knows about the bends. Basically, when you're at a high pressure and you have nitrogen in your bloodstream, right? Because air is 80% nitrogen. You have this gas in your blood. And then if you go to a lower pressure, if you remember Boyle's law or all those laws we learned in high school chemistry, the higher pressure gas in your body will come out of solution and go up into the air. And so if you have all these little nitrogen bubbles in your blood popping out because you're at a lower pressure, they can do bad things like get stuck in your lung or your heart or your brain and cause problems, or your joints and cause pain. And that's called the bends, because you get bent over. And scuba divers learned about it. They would go down deep, breathe in all this super high pressure air, and then if they came up too fast, the nitrogen would come out and give them problems. In space, what you're doing is going from normal pressure down to much lower pressure. When you go outside, your body's not a vacuum, but it's about a third of an atmosphere. And so the nitrogen can come out. So there's different ways that we get rid of that nitrogen. You breathe 100% oxygen, usually for an hour or a couple hours before you go out. The protocol I did was something called in-suit light exercise, or ILE. So we would get inside the suit. We would breathe on a mask for an hour beforehand, and then you get in the suit, put your helmet on, and the suit itself is 100% oxygen. And you kind of slowly reduce your pressure to let your body adapt so you don't get the bend. So it's the same problem that scuba divers have, is the same problem that astronauts have, or astronauts haven't had, knock on wood, because we go through all this precaution to not have it.
Sure. So no smoking, basically, in areas.
Not on the American segment, and not on the Russian segment either. It's kind of a joke.
What do the Russians do? They must just be white knuckling it,
Yeah, well, I think nowadays it's not so much of an issue, but in the early, cosmonauts smoke. A lot of people on Earth smoked. The early astronauts smoked at NASA. So, it kind of sucks if you're a smoker. You just go cold turkey, because the smoke alarm would be going off a lot if you were smoking in space.
Of course.
All right. Let me go to the trailer of Terry's movie, One More Orbit, just so we can talk a little bit about it before we come back to the pictures. How about that?
I think that sounds like a great idea. We've talked about so much of it up front that we should see some of the images.
Yeah.
All right. Let's take a look.
We're trying to set a world record.
It's the fastest time ever to go from one place on the Earth over both poles and back to the same point on the Earth, all in under 48 hours.
Calling themselves One More Orbit, their goal is to complete the fastest circumnavigation of the Earth via the North and South Poles in a business jet. And they're live streaming the whole thing.
We need to go far and fast. To fly around the Earth is a major undertaking. It's not something you can do by yourself.
What we were achieving was something that has never been achieved before.
The real challenge is making sure the refuels work very, very quickly.
The pit stops.
You could lose a huge amount of time if your
Right.
refuel was too slow. There are no divert airfields in Antarctica in the midwinter.
Is this mission so important to me that I am happy to risk my life?
1 hour! 1 hour to take off!
And I'm such a tech nerd that yes. Yes, it is.
One of the problems with being an astronaut is that your bucket list gets too long, and there are so many beautiful places on the planet that you want to see. This is a beautiful business jet, except normally you don't live in an airplane.
Do you remember when we got ice cream on board ISS?
Yes! We chose the Kennedy Space Center as the location for our launch, where Apollo left from 50 years ago.
I didn't even know satellites could do this.
I figured you must have some engineer and some really good technical people even to make the Wi-Fi work.
One More Orbit, our Gulfstream G650ER is not going to slow down for anybody. Okay, so it's going to catch him up. Yannicka and Magdalena are probably the only two living females on the planet that have circumnavigated the poles.
Wow.
Very
Wow.
cool. Very cool.
Very beautiful.
Beautiful.
Piece.
Beautiful.
Very cool.
I love it, man. Thanks for showing the trailer. Now I want to see the movie again.
Yeah. Well,
So we,
let me tell you that many things impressed me, like in this movie. But one thing for sure was the quality of the internet you guys had on that plane. How did you manage that?
Well, that was Yannicka's job. When we were putting the team together, I knew we'd need a lot of teams because we stopped for fuel in 3 different locations. We had a mission control in Qatar. Qatar Airways provided our airplane. And then we had the Kennedy Space Center where we launched and landed from. And then we had on the airplane. So I think that's 6 different locations. And I knew I'd need somebody to film on the airplane because I would be busy directing. And the story was also about me and Hamish, my partner, in crime in this film. So I asked Yannicka she's a filmmaker. That was her training at school. And so I asked her to film the on board the airplane part. And then the idea of live streaming came up and she got sucked in 100% into the live streaming part. So we used a combination of the normal airplane Wi-Fi. You can connect to the airplane. There's a big dish in the rudder area that goes up to satellites. But that wasn't going to be nearly what we needed because airliners are normally over the normal part of the Earth. They aren't over the North Pole or South Pole. So she worked a lot with Inmarsat, which is a company that owns the satellites, and another company called Satcom Direct that kind of owns the middle tier of this satellite Wi-Fi. Kind of like there's oil wells coming out of the ground, and then there's pipelines that bring the oil to us, and then there's gas stations. So that's the same thing with Wi-Fi. There's different segments. So it was a full-time job for her to get that going, but it was pretty cool project. We got to live stream it live, and there was lots of commentary on it, and people were following us. Every once in a while I'll run into somebody, they're like, "Oh, you did one more orbit." My kids were following that, and which is pretty neat to see that.
What did you shoot it on? I'm just curious what your format was.
Now that is a great question. So the original plan was we were going to have a very major brand camera company was very excited and they wanted to provide us with the cameras. I call them small, medium, and large and extra large cameras. I couldn't just take an RA, or a Red because there wasn't enough room or mass on the airplane. We couldn't bring Hollywood cameras on the airplane. There wasn't enough room to put them on there, and we were overweight. And I needed small cameras to attach to the wall to film us kind of throughout the whole thing, the Truman Show cameras. And I wanted a camera to look out both windows. I think I got the first ever time-lapse movie flying around the entire Earth in an airplane. I don't know if anybody's ever done it. Certainly over the North and South Pole, I'm sure not. So to get all those different cameras, I needed, really small GoPro-like things, kind of a point and shoot. To film in the camera, I needed like a Pro SLR with 4K video. And then we needed the Hollywood cameras for on the ground. And I knew this would be a nightmare in post because you got to color correct all that stuff. So I was hoping to get one brand, which we had. They were very excited about it. And then a few weeks before launch, when I was like, "Hey, we need the stuff shipped. Hey, we gave you our address. Are you going to ship it?" We just got ghosted. We just got ghosted, 100% ghosted. It was such a Hollywood move. So we ended up using 12 different all the different cinematographers brought their own camera. So we had RA, we had Red, we had Canon, we had Sony, we had iPhone. Some of the best shots we took were on an iPhone, believe it or not. So anyway, so we had
Rodrigo, let's play that clip on a loop just in case we need it later. You know what I mean? If we can some proper pandering later on.
Yes, it was. And we were running around all the rental houses across the Southeast U.S. And I was also really lucky. Not only did I have Jim, but I had Richard Crudo and Bill Bennett, who are also ASC members. And I had Nick Sadler, who's an amazing cinematographer. Yannicka is FNF, the Norwegian ASC. And Dan Green is Canadian, who's an amazing. So I had like an embarrassment of riches when it came to folks who shot the film.
Well, now, I mean, because you're probably, you know, I'm imagining that you're great at troubleshooting and on the fly, especially. You had all these different formats, all these different cameras. I'm sure you wanted to. It looks like you did some multi-camera work. Did you have any trouble gen locking your systems?
So one of the things we did that helped a lot was we set all the cameras to GMT. And so we also didn't have a lot of time. We had to get through edit pretty quickly. And the editors went through, it was like 20 terabytes. It was some massive number of terabytes of video because we had 6 cameras running almost the whole time on the airplane and these 5 different ground locations. We had a lot of video, and they were able, there's one sequence where we're talking on the airplane and mission control is talking to us and we go back and forth. And the only way that that could have ever happened is if it was time synced. So we just set the cameras to GMT and use that. There was not a lot, you know, you can do the clap. But when the cameras are in different continents, that doesn't work quite as well.
True enough.
All right, let me bring just a couple more questions from the audience, and we can see just a little bit more of the photos that we've selected. So Curtis is asking about the shutter speed. Since you're traveling in such high speed over the Earth, how does that work out?
Right. So he's talking about from space, and that is a massive, massive, massive problem at nighttime. During the daytime, it's usually not too much. You know, you can shoot at a thousandth of a second, and that's good enough. Because you're so far away, you're hundreds of miles or maybe thousands of miles away. So even though you are moving fast, the relative motion isn't that bad. But when you're at nighttime, you know, even if you push the ISO, a lot of my Nikon shots were shot at 1/6400th of or 6400 ISO. The Canon stuff for IMAX we did at 10,000 ISO. So you're pushing ISO pretty hard, but that still requires a tenth of a second. Some of the faint aurora shots or even the star shots at night were down to a quarter of a second or an eighth of a second. And at 17,000 miles an hour, you know, that was tough. So there was a real balance between, you couldn't go much less than a tenth of a second. That was like the minimum to get an okay shot. You know, some of my stuff at nighttime was a quarter of a second or whatever. And you could see motion, you know, even though the camera's on a bracket and it's perfectly still, there's still motion there. So I think a tenth of a second was the minimum you could do. And that's talk about, those were on stars that are light years away. So that, you know, the distance was about as far as you could get.
I guess on the same vein, Stephen asks if you needed some sort of stabilization for the camera in 0G. How does that work out?
Actually, 0G does not eliminate micro jitter. So if you're trying to carry a camera in, there's a couple scenes in the IMAX movie that I just hate. Every time I see them, I hate them because I can see the vibration and it just, I you know, that was as steady as you can be. And I would say 0G even exacerbates jitters from your hands because everybody has really small tremors, just their body is not steady. So if I was holding a camera in 0G, it would be vibrating. The way to do it is to not hold it, like just let the camera float, and then there's no vibration. But as soon as you grab onto a camera, it's going to shake. So you either need to let the camera float or put it on a bracket and let the bracket stabilize it.
Wonderful.
Imagine shoot on silver halide. You know, what a different scenario we'd be working with.
Yeah, absolutely. Early days.
Send some of that. Yeah, exactly.
No delete button, right? And
NASA might not like that dangerous chemical, but yeah, that would be fun.
Exactly.
All right, we still have a few minutes. Let's take a look at some of the pictures that we have here. So are these the China?
They're the Chinese mountains.
Chinese mountains, yeah.
Ernst Haas, a very famous photographer from just after the war, said photography is the art of selection. And I just thought this stood out for me as the art of selection. I mean, this could be anything, right? it's just an amazing image. And what an incredibly remote area you're photographing.
Yeah, that part of the world is very remote, for sure. And just south of there, as you get into India, it's jungle and there's billions of people. But that part of China, it sure does look pretty remote from space. One of the things that always fascinates me, and I'd love to do a talk on this, is how patterns repeat themselves on the microscopic level, to the human level, to the Earth level, to the galaxy and universe level.
Yeah.
And, it just looks like veins, when you see those valleys in the mountains, they look like veins.
Funny you should say that. That leads
yeah.
to the next photo, I think, that we have of Papua New Guinea.
Let's go to the next. What our order, we kind of, there it is.
Oh.
And I was just so moved by this picture because all those rivers reach up into the highlands. And Papua New Guinea is a fascinating place, as you well know.
It's on my bucket list. I've never been.
Oh, great. Yeah. Maybe you can explain the fact that this around how you exposed this and how you made the shot.
Yeah. So one of the things about rivers is there are lots of rivers down there and you normally can't see them at all. Places like the Congo and the Amazon, there's millions of miles of river there, but you can't see them unless the sun is at the right angle, and we call it sun glint. And then you see this. And so I was just flying over the South Pacific, minding my own. I had my camera in hand like I normally did, and it happened to be orbital noon, so the sun was directly overhead. And all of a sudden, boom! All these rivers appeared out of nowhere. So I just started shooting the camera, and this is not. I didn't Photoshop this at all. This is just this high contrast shot came. It's rivers coming out of the mountains. The black is the green jungle, and the white is the sea. And when I saw this, I remember thinking, this is Papua New Guinea. This is like the natives in Gilligan's Island. I mean, there's people down there who have never seen an iPhone, don't have electricity. Yes. Sure enough, a friend of mine, I actually went to the South Pole with her a couple years later. She went there on this, humanitarian trip, and she sent pictures, and they're living in huts. They're just wearing grass skirts with no shirts. It was exactly what I had imagined. And I remember thinking, what would those people think if they knew that there was an astronaut in space taking pictures of them? It was a really profound moment to think how far our technology's come in the last century or two. But the visuals of it were pretty cool. It looks like capillaries to me, like if you had a microscope in your finger, these little micro blood vessels. So yeah.
Absolutely.
What a great shot.
Terry, you mentioned something interesting on your last reply about Photoshop. How much Photoshop goes on space pictures? Like how much can you do and should you do on pictures? Because we have, for instance, we know that many pictures from planets are even they even have the color artificially added, right? But how about the Earth? When you're shooting the Earth, what are you supposed to do and what you're not supposed to do?
Yeah. So Hubble pictures are all 100% Photoshop. I met the guy in Baltimore who does that, and they need to use colors to visualize different elements. Is it hydrogen? Is it helium? So on. And to really make the images look beautiful. If you were just out in space looking at a nebula, you would see a little bit of gray, and that would be about it. So the pictures I took, especially when I published them, have really minimal Photoshop. When I would tweet pictures when I was in space, I would just hit "I feel lucky" on Picasa, and it would brighten it up and give it a little bit of color. And those scratch panes really took color out of it because it's kind of just brown plastic. So you had to put some of the color back in there. But for the most part, it was not, a little bit extra brightness, a little bit extra contrast, maybe bring the color gain up. But I did not. I tried to make it as much as what my brain remembered. Auroras are much more colorful on a camera than they are in your brain. Your your brain can still perceive that green and pink of the aurora. It's just not as bright. The camera really, our eyes are designed to work in color in the day and black and white at night. So night photos tend to bring out more color than what your brain really sees. The colors are still there. It's just more than you would normally see.
Terry, Curtis asks something very interesting here. He's asking if NASA owns the rights of the pictures, or if you share that. How does that work between the photographer, the astronaut, and NASA?
Mm-hmm. So we don't bring personal cameras. There's been a few snuck up there, but you don't need them. It's like a photographer's dream. It was Nikon D4s from one end of the station to the other. Everything from 8mm super wide angle fisheye to I had an 800mm telescope basically with a doubler and everything in between. It was a dream. There's no need to bring your own cameras. But the images we take are all public domain. And so you can go on the NASA website, you can Google stuff. It's like super hard to find images sometimes on that website, but if you're lucky enough, you can find those images and use them. Just give the people credit who shot it, or at least NASA at a minimum. So the images of Earth are public domain. I published a book that I get paid a little bit, not a lot for. So anybody can do that. If you want to use NASA images and make some content, you can. The thing that where rights come into play is if there's an astronaut's image. So if there's a picture of me or of, Buzz Aldrin on the moon or whatever, then the individual's entitled to rights. Yeah. If they're retired from NASA, or if they're at NASA, you have to get permission to use it. So if it's just a nature picture, that's okay. If it's just Earth or stars. But if there's an astronaut in it, you're supposed to get, there are royalty issues there, but we don't have copyright to it per se.
Wonderful. Terry, I was looking at this picture of Italy, and I was wondering which place at night impressed you the most?
Italy is definitely the easiest to see. I when I do talks, a lot of times I'll do a interaction with the audience. Guess where? Can you say where this is? And this is always my first slide. This is the the Alex Trebek $100 question. Where is this? And everybody knows this is Italy. One time I showed this question, and this 12-year-old yelled out, "Montenegro," and I was like, "You're right. There's Montenegro." So smart
Right
kid. Yeah, just across the Adriatic. Italy is the most recognizable by far, but it's really kind of fun. And especially cosmonauts get really good at this, because the Russians have these big windows that they can always look out, and they spend time looking out a lot more, I guess, than we do. And they know cities at night, like instantly. If you were playing trivia with some of these guys, just showing random city lights, they could name them all. They know every city on Earth. That's pretty impressive. But that's one of the advantages, is the more time you spend looking out, the more you get to know the Earth. I really got to know the Earth by color, by the way, but that's a different topic.
Terry, you mentioned the auroras, and this is one of the most incredible pictures that we've seen, and it's really something. What do you have to say about it? Because you just mentioned that auroras are more colorful in camera than in our brains, right?
Yeah. So the auroras are awesome. You see the northern lights in December and January, and you see the southern lights in May and June and July. The northern lights were always off in the distance. They were kind of like this ghost that would appear. In this particular picture, the reason you can see Earth so well is that it's a full moon. So that's not sunlight on Earth. That's actually moonlight on Earth. And it's so, 6400 ISO, 10th of a second, it shows up pretty well. This is the UK and Ireland. You can see Norway. You can see the snow in Norway, actually, off to the east there. Mm-hmm. But this is a great time lapse. I made a video out of this, and as you're flying, you can see the plasma flowing and dancing, just as it's this river of flowing plasma. It's amazing. But the aurora every time is different. It was always awesome. The northern lights were way in the distance. The southern lights were really close. I remember flying through it one night. It was like I was surrounded by this alien. It was like a Star Trek movie when they fly through the nebula, and there were no Klingons on the other side to attack us, thankfully. But I felt like I was in a Star Trek movie. And I didn't know this. The North Magnetic Pole is near the North Pole. The South Magnetic Pole is really far from the South Pole. which means it's closer to our orbit. And I didn't know this till I was in space, and I looked it up on Wikipedia and learned about this.
Terry, does the station itself has some cameras attached to it and pointed to Earth? How those pictures fare with those that astronauts take from?
Yeah, there's
the windows?
I think there's a commercial experiment now that has like a 4K picture of Earth. You can watch it at all times. And there's like SD cameras that NASA has for the robotics. So there's several cameras that we use to move the arm just to see what's going on out there. But that video is kind of 90s video. It's not good. It's like watching an old Super Bowl. And the new 4K cameras are good, but there's something robotic about them. There's no soul. There's nobody taking the shot, framing it. I don't know. It just doesn't look as good as the human pictures. I think when I look at it, it's still cool. I mean, to have, Earth in the background, but I think I prefer human shots.
I've got a question for you. I read the intro that Buzz Aldrin wrote in View from Above, and it's kind of a love letter. It's beautiful. And he says in there, he fully admits that astronauts are a competitive species. And he fully admits that. And so my question is, what's the next mountain you're going to climb? Where's the next summit? Where do you go from here?
I kind of fell in love with directing, to be honest. I'd love to, make some film and TV. This summer I made a short film with Yannicka called Cosmic Perspective. And I would really love to turn that into a TV series where I talk to folks about space photography. It's a movie about space photography and how it shaped our perspective about everything, about our place in the universe, about Earth, about the environment. Because there's so much that we've learned. And if you think of just what people know and understand and think today versus 50 years ago or 100 years ago or 500 years ago, we've come so far, and so much of that perspective shift has been through photography. So I'd love to do a show like that. I'd love to do a show where I get to go travel and see the places that I saw from space. This is an idea that I've had for a couple of years, and 2020 is not the year to shoot that show, but maybe in another year or two it will be. And I'd like to keep on directing. I'd like to. I've been reading a lot about scripts and thinking about some ideas for scripts, and that's a whole nother universe. That's not, you can't just say you want to do something and do it. There's a lot of work you have to put in to get to that point. But I'd like to, start maybe with some shorts and see where it goes. I've done a few short films in front of the camera, actually, not behind it. But that's a direction I'd like to pursue also.
That's awesome.
Yeah. You've definitely picked, that is the ultimate summit. I mean, there's like astronaut and then Hollywood director.
Yeah.
A little bit tougher, because it's not intellectually challenging, but because it is
yes.
crazy labyrinth, like a 3-dimensional chess game that you have to play, and it is a challenge. I mean, we're, as that's the world we live in too, and so it's and it feels like the goalpost keeps moving. So
yeah.
Where is it now?
The executive that was going to greenlight your project is now gone with another company, and now the new executive wants something else. Yeah, but at the end of the day, it's storytelling through a visual art. It's not a written art. It's not a sound recording, although sound is probably half or more of a movie. And the script is the entire movie. So you need to be able to write. So you kind of need all aspects. You need to be able to write.
Yes.
You need sound for your film. I know for One More Orbit, we had our own composer. It was awesome. I got to have my own bespoke, soundtrack for that movie. But it really comes down to storytelling, and can you tell a story through visual medium? And that's a challenge. That's a challenge.
Here in the pandemic, one of the few industries that is, booming is, film. people are at home and they're looking for more content. They're streaming content, and there is a real appetite for it. And so I think you've chosen wisely.
Hopefully, we'll see.
Terry, as we come to the end of our stream, I'd like to bring this last picture up, and I'd love if you could tell us why it is so special for you.
Oh yeah. Well, this was the last picture I took. It was the last day in space, and I wanted to get one more shot, so I put the wide angle. I think it was a 10 millimeter on there, and set it up with f/22, so a really small aperture, and that gives the starburst effect with a small aperture. And I remember I took this shot and I looked at the viewfinder on the Nikon, and it was like, okay, I'm done. I'm never going to take a better picture in my lifetime. Yeah, put the camera away, and I pulled the card out. I downloaded it, and I went down to the Russian segment and put on my spacesuit and came back to Earth. I was done after this.
That's it.
Yeah, I just thought it was cool.
Yeah.
Image
That's
number
awesome.
300,000.
319 and something. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Terry,
Wow.
thank you so much, man. You have no idea how happy we are to inaugurate this our lives, in this stream new career with you. This has been like a blessing. Thank you.
Very generous of you, Terry. And we will put links up on where you can get view from above and how to astronaut, and where you can go to stream a beautiful planet. So look out for that. We'll make that available.
Amazing. Thanks for having me. This was fun. I love talking cameras.
It just has been a great pleasure. And you've done it so well.
Thank you.
This was fun. This is awesome.
All right. Thank you, Terry. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for coming. Thank you for your questions. Stay tuned. We'll have more content like this, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.